The Hamptons sparkled under the June sun as the last of the guests arrived at Maxwell Reed's clifftop estate. Roses and orchids adorned every surface of the sprawling mansion, their fragrance mingling with the salty breeze rolling in from the Atlantic. Crystal champagne flutes clinked amid hushed conversations and sideways glances. This was, without question, the most talked-about wedding of the season, though not for the reasons one might expect. "Can you believe it? Her," whispered Vanessa Cromwell to her husband behind a manicured hand. 15 years as his assistant, and suddenly she's becoming Mrs. Reed, plain Jane Eleanor Murphy. Eleanor, however, was anything but plain today. Her ivory gown, custom-designed by one of New York's most exclusive ateliers, hugged her figure in ways that made several guests question how they'd never noticed her quiet beauty before. Her chestnut hair was swept into an elegant updo, accentuating high cheekbones that caught the light as she smiled demurely at well-wishers. Standing at the altar overlooking the ocean, Maxwell Reed scanned the crowd with satisfaction. At 45, the real estate tycoon cut an imposing figure in his tailored tuxedo. His salt-and-pepper hair and piercing blue eyes had graced the covers of business magazines, proclaiming him one of America's most eligible bachelors following his divorce. Now, merely 3 months after finalizing that divorce, he was remarrying to the astonishment of Manhattan's elite social circles. "She must be pregnant," a socialite muttered to her companion. "Or she knows where the bodies are buried," came the reply with a smirk. If Eleanor heard these comments, she gave no indication. Her focus remained on Maxwell as she glided down the aisle, her eyes never leaving his. When their fingers touched, a current seemed to pass between them that was visible even to the most skeptical guests. What none of the whispering attendees knew was that this wedding, this union that appeared so sudden and incomprehensible, had been meticulously planned by Maxwell for months. Not as a celebration of love, but as the opening move in an elaborate game of revenge against his ex-wife, Victoria. Victoria Reed, now Victoria Caldwell again, had declined her invitation with a brief, elegant note. But she had sent a gift, an antique silver mirror accompanied by a card bearing only 5 words, "It will all reflect back." As Maxwell slipped the platinum band onto Eleanor's finger, his thoughts drifted momentarily to that cryptic message before being pulled back to the present by the minister's pronouncement. Applause erupted as he kissed his bride, and Eleanor's smile widened, revealing a confidence that seemed new and somehow disconcerting. "Shall we?" she whispered, taking his arm with an assurance that didn't match the timid assistant he'd known for years. The reception unfolded like a theatrical production. Eleanor moved through the crowd with unexpected grace, charming Maxwell's business associates and social connections alike. She conversed knowledgeably about market trends with his investors and discussed rare vintages with his wine collector friends. Maxwell found himself watching her with growing curiosity as she seamlessly navigated conversations that would have been beyond the knowledge of the woman who had organized his schedule and brought him coffee for the past 15 years. "Your new wife is quite the revelation, Max," commented Richard Hoffman, his oldest friend and business partner, clapping him on the shoulder. "Hard to believe she's been hiding in plain sight all these years." Maxwell nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor has many hidden talents." "Clearly," Richard replied, watching as she discussed the provenance of an obscure artist with the director of the Metropolitan Museum. Victoria must be absolutely livid. That had been the plan, of course. Victoria had treated Eleanor with casual cruelty throughout his first marriage, regarding the assistant as little more than furniture. The beautiful, socially connected Victoria had never missed an opportunity to remind Eleanor of her plainness, her insignificance. The perfect revenge was to elevate the woman Victoria had disdained to the position she herself had once held. At least, that had been Maxwell's calculation when he'd proposed their arrangement 6 months ago. A marriage of convenience. Eleanor would gain wealth and social standing beyond her wildest dreams, and he would gain the satisfaction of Victoria's humiliation. After a suitable period, perhaps 2 years, they would part amicably, with Eleanor receiving a generous settlement. But as he watched her now, laughing with Senator Walker about educational policy in a way that suggested intimate knowledge of the subject, Maxwell felt the first flicker of unease. This poised, articulate woman bore little resemblance to his efficient but unremarkable assistant. A dance husband, Eleanor appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. Her touch was cool, her smile enigmatic. As they moved across the floor, guests watched with approval. They made a striking couple, his powerful frame guiding her lithe form through the steps of the waltz. "You're full of surprises today," Maxwell murmured, keeping his smile in place for the benefit of onlookers. "Everyone has secrets, Maxwell," she replied, her green eyes holding his. "Even plain Jane Eleanor." Later that night, as their guests departed, and they were left alone in the palatial master suite, Maxwell watched as Eleanor removed her jewelry at the vanity. The antique silver mirror from Victoria stood on the dresser, still in its wrapping. "Shall we open your ex-wife's gift?" Eleanor asked, catching his reflection, watching her. "Leave it," Maxwell said tersely. "Better yet, send it back unopened." Eleanor turned to face him, something unreadable in her expression. "Are you sure? Refusing gifts can be seen as fearful." "I'm not afraid of Victoria," he replied sharply. "Of course not," Eleanor said, rising gracefully. "You've won, after all, the company, the house, and now—" She gestured to herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The perfect wife to complete your victory." Maxwell studied her, this woman he thought he knew so well, yet suddenly seemed a stranger. "This arrangement works only if we're honest with each other, Eleanor." "Honest?" She laughed softly. "Like telling your guests this is a love match, like pretending you married me for any reason other than to hurt Victoria." "You agreed to the terms," he reminded her coolly. "I did," she acknowledged, moving toward the balcony doors. She opened them, letting in the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. The moonlight silvered her profile as she looked out toward the dark Atlantic. "But terms can evolve, Maxwell. People can change." "What does that mean?" he asked, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the night air. Eleanor turned back to him, and for a moment, just a moment, Maxwell could have sworn her eyes reflected the moonlight like water. "It means," she said quietly, "that you might have started this game, but you have no idea how it's going to end." 3 weeks after the wedding, Maxwell sat in his home office overlooking the Atlantic, frowning at the preliminary report on his screen. James Donovan, the private investigator he'd hired, had sent a frustratingly vague update on Eleanor's background. "Subject's documented history contains inconsistencies," Donovan wrote. "Birth records exist, but appear to have been amended. Foster care documentation incomplete. College transcripts verified, but no former classmates recall her. Employment history prior to Reed Enterprises unverifiable. Possible connection to European. Aristocracy through maternal line requires further investigation." Maxwell closed the laptop with a sharp click. Eleanor had been his executive assistant for 15 years. How could her background be so obscure? He'd run a standard background check when hiring her, of course, but it had been basic. Just enough to verify she had no criminal history, and her resume wasn't fabricated. The soft click of heels on marble announced her arrival moments before she appeared in the doorway. In the 3 weeks since their wedding, Eleanor had undergone a subtle but unmistakable transformation. Her wardrobe had shifted from serviceable office attire to elegant designer pieces that looked as if they'd been in her closet for years. Her posture, her speech patterns, even the way she moved through a room had changed, as if she'd stepped fully into a role she'd been rehearsing for a lifetime. "The Andersons confirmed for dinner Friday," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Rachel mentioned they're bringing that art dealer from Barcelona, the one you've been trying to connect with for the Southport development." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "How did you manage that? I've been trying to get a meeting with Delgado for months." Eleanor smiled. "It seems we attended the same exhibition in Madrid years ago. I mentioned it when I called Rachel." "You've never been to Madrid," Maxwell stated flatly. "Haven't I?" Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "How would you know, Maxwell? You never once asked about my life outside the office in 15 years. The accusation hung in the air between them. She wasn't wrong. Eleanor had been a fixture in his professional life, Reliable, efficient, invisible. He'd never considered her personal life relevant. "I should check on Mrs. Winters," Eleanor continued when he didn't respond. "She seemed unwell this morning." Mrs. Winters, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Reed family for over 30 years, had initially been cold toward Eleanor, but like everyone else in the household staff, she had quickly warmed to the new Mrs. Reed. "She's just a housekeeper," Maxwell said dismissively. "Have Dr. Lyons make a house call if necessary." "Just a housekeeper?" Eleanor's voice cooled noticeably. "Margaret Winters has dedicated her life to this house, to your family. She practically raised you after your mother left." Maxwell stared at her, unsettled. He had never shared those details of his childhood with Eleanor. "The staff talk," she explained, reading his expression, "and unlike some people in this house, I listen." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Maxwell with more questions than answers. That Friday evening, the dinner party unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Eleanor proved to be an exceptional hostess, anticipating every need and guiding conversations with subtle expertise. Maxwell watched as she discussed Spanish art with Delgado in fluent Catalan, leaving the art dealer visibly impressed. "Your wife is remarkable," Rachel Anderson commented to Maxwell as they moved to the terrace for coffee. "Victoria was always charming, of course, but Eleanor has such depth." Victoria's name still triggered a flash of bitter anger in Maxwell. He'd discovered her affair with his then best friend 6 months ago, a betrayal that had shattered their marriage of 15 years and ended a friendship of 20. "She surprises me daily," Maxwell replied truthfully. On the other side of the terrace, Eleanor was deep in conversation with Delgado. The art dealer was nodding enthusiastically. His earlier reservation completely vanished. "He'll agree to your proposal," Eleanor murmured to Maxwell later as they bid their guests goodbye. "Faz, I've arranged for him to tour the Southport site on Tuesday." "How could you possibly know what proposal I had in mind?" Maxwell asked once they were alone. "I haven't discussed the Southport Cultural Center with anyone." Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "You've left the plans open on your desk for weeks, Maxwell. I've always paid attention to details. It's why you hired me, remember?" Later that night, unable to sleep, Maxwell wandered through the quiet mansion. He found himself drawn to Eleanor's private sitting room, a space she'd claimed for herself and subtly transformed. Gone were the modernist furnishings Victoria had installed, replaced with antiques that somehow felt more appropriate to the historic house. On an impulse, he tried the door. It opened silently. Inside, moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating shelves lined with books on subjects ranging from art history to maritime law. A small writing desk held a leather-bound journal, closed and fastened with an unfamiliar symbol embossed on its cover. Beside it lay a piece of coral, polished and gleaming in the moonlight. Maxwell moved to the desk, his fingers hovering over the journal. "Invading my privacy already?" Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. Maxwell straightened, unapologetic. "I believe I'm entitled to know who's living in my house." "Your house?" She entered the room, closing the door behind her. "I believe our marriage contract makes this our house." "A contract you're not adhering to," Maxwell countered. "This arrangement was meant to be straightforward. You play the role of devoted wife in public, and in return you enjoy the lifestyle and eventual settlement we agreed upon. But he gestured vaguely, "you're not the same person." Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the ocean. "Perhaps I'm exactly who I've always been, and you're only now seeing me clearly." "You speak languages I never knew you." "Understood. You have knowledge of art, wine, finance, subjects we never discussed. You've charmed people who are notoriously difficult to impress." Maxwell stepped closer to her. "Who are you, Eleanor?" She turned to face him, moonlight silhouetting her figure against the window. "I'm the woman you married," she replied simply. "Married my assistant, a woman who was unremarkable except for her efficiency." Something flashed in her eyes at that. Anger, perhaps, or hurt. "Is that what you thought? That I was unremarkable? That I existed only to bring you coffee and manage your calendar?" She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "How convenient for you to believe that." Donovan will find out the truth, Maxwell said coldly. Eleanor's expression shifted subtly. Your investigator. I wouldn't count on receiving any more reports from Mr. Donovan. A chill ran down Maxwell's spine. What have you done? She raised an eyebrow. Nothing, but there are forces at work here beyond your understanding, Maxwell. She moved past him toward the door, then paused. You started this as a game, a petty revenge against Victoria. But some games, once begun, take on a life of their own. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Maxwell alone in the moonlit room, staring at the journal on the desk and the strange symbol that seemed to undulate in the shifting light, almost like waves upon the sea. Outside, the tide rose against the cliffs below the mansion, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the water. I've arranged for the jet to be ready at 9 tomorrow morning, Eleanor announced, placing a leather portfolio on Maxwell's desk. I've compiled the research on the Pacific Resort investment, including the environmental impact assessments you requested. 4 months into their marriage, the dynamic between them had settled into an uneasy rhythm. In public, they presented the image of a power couple, the brilliant real estate magnate and his surprisingly astute wife. In private, they maintained a careful distance like two chess players studying each other across the board. Maxwell opened the portfolio. The analysis was impeccable, more thorough than anything his executive team had produced. Thank you, he said, the words feeling stiff on his tongue. Despite his misgivings, he couldn't deny that Eleanor had proven an asset to his business. Since their wedding, Reed Enterprises had secured 3 major deals that had previously been stalled. The Newman property near Montauk is also on the market again, Eleanor continued. I know you've had your eye on it for years. The owners are struggling financially. They'd likely accept 20% below market value. Maxwell looked up sharply. How do you know about the Newman property? That was a private discussion with my acquisition team years ago. Eleanor's smile was serene. You mentioned it once in passing. Before he could challenge this obvious lie, she added, Our anniversary is in 8 months. I thought we might host the celebration there, assuming you acquire it by then. Our arrangement doesn't extend to a first anniversary, Maxwell reminded her coldly. Doesn't it? She tilted her head slightly. I believe our contract specified a minimum of 2 years to maintain appearances. Maxwell didn't respond. The truth was, the terms of their arrangement had become increasingly blurred. Eleanor had integrated herself so seamlessly into his business and social circles that extricating her would be more complicated than he'd anticipated. And there was something else, something he was reluctant to acknowledge even to himself. Despite his suspicions, despite the mysteries surrounding her, he found himself increasingly drawn to this new version of Eleanor. Her intelligence, her quiet confidence, the way her eyes caught the light when she laughed, all of it affected him in ways he hadn't expected. I've invited Victoria to the charity gala next week, Eleanor said casually, bringing him abruptly back to the present. You did what? Maxwell's voice was dangerously quiet. It's a cancer research benefit, Maxwell. Victoria's mother survived breast cancer. Twice. It would look petty to exclude her. Eleanor straightened a pen on his desk. Besides, don't you want her to see how happy we are? The calculated look in Eleanor's eyes reminded Maxwell of their arrangement's original purpose. Somewhere along the way, he'd almost forgotten that this marriage had begun as an instrument of revenge. Fine, he conceded, but keep her away from me. Of course, darling. The endearment rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, but her eyes held a challenge he couldn't quite decipher. The Pacific Island was everything the brochure had promised. Pristine. Beaches, crystalline waters, and absolute privacy. The resort Maxwell was considering for acquisition occupied a sheltered bay on the eastern side, its luxury villas nestled among lush, tropical vegetation. It's perfect, Eleanor said, standing on the deck of their villa on their second evening. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, reflecting off the still waters of the bay. She wore a simple white sundress, her skin golden in the fading light, her hair loose in the gentle breeze. Maxwell joined her at the railing, handing her a glass of wine. The location is ideal, but the existing structures need significant renovation. She agreed, sipping her wine. But the foundations are solid. Sometimes that's all you need. A strong foundation. The rest can be rebuilt. Her double meaning wasn't lost on him. And what's our foundation, Eleanor? Deception? Convenience? She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. Does it matter? We're here now. It matters to me. Maxwell surprised himself with the admission. I don't know who you really are. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting back to the ocean. No one really knows anyone, Maxwell. We show different facets of ourselves to different people at different times. That's a convenient philosophy when you're hiding something. She smiled faintly. We're all hiding something. Before he could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted their conversation. Dark clouds had appeared suddenly on the horizon, moving toward the island with unnatural speed. A storm's coming, Eleanor observed, but she made no move to go inside. Within minutes, the wind had picked up dramatically, whipping the palm trees into a frenzy. The previously calm sea churned violently below their villa. We should get inside, Maxwell said, taking her elbow. Eleanor resisted, her eyes fixed on the approaching storm. The air crackled with electricity, and Maxwell felt a strange pressure building in his ears. Eleanor, he urged more firmly, unsettled by her trance-like state. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in stark relief. For a heartbeat, Maxwell thought he saw something else reflected in her eyes, something ancient and not entirely human. Then the moment passed, as rain began to lash down in sheets. Eleanor blinked as if awakening, and allowed him to guide her inside just as a powerful gust of wind shattered the glass in one of the deck doors. The storm raged for 3 days, cutting off communication with the mainland and confining them to their villa. The resort staff did their best to make them comfortable, but as generator fuel ran low and supplies dwindled, tension mounted among the few guests stranded on the island. It was during this enforced isolation that Maxwell discovered a surprising truth. He enjoyed Eleanor's company. Without the distractions of business or social obligations, they talked for hours about books, philosophy, their differing views on architecture. She challenged him intellectually in ways Victoria never had, pushing him to defend his positions, offering perspectives he'd never considered. On the third night, as the storm finally began to abate, Maxwell confessed his lifelong fear of deep water, a secret he'd kept closely guarded since childhood. I nearly drowned when I was 7, he told her, the whiskey and the intimacy of the storm-darkened room loosening his tongue. My father threw me into the deep end, said it was the only way to learn. I remember the panic, the burn in my lungs. Eleanor listened without judgment, her hand finding his in the darkness. The sea gives life and takes it away, she said softly. It deserves your respect, not your fear. The next morning, as sunlight broke through the dissipating clouds, Eleanor led him down to the beach. The storm had transformed the landscape, depositing strange shells and pieces of coral along the shore. Come, she said, leading him toward the water. Maxwell hesitated at the edge of the surf. Trust me, Eleanor urged, her green eyes holding his. I won't let anything happen to you. To his own surprise, Maxwell believed her. Step by step, she guided him into the clear blue water until it reached his chest. His heart raced, but her hands remained steady on his arms. Close your eyes, she instructed. Feel the rhythm of the waves. They're part of a greater pattern, like a heartbeat. As he followed her instructions, something shifted inside him. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it receded, becoming manageable. When they returned to New York 4 days later, something fundamental had changed between them. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, replaced by a tentative connection neither had anticipated. They arrived home to a household in disarray. Mrs. Winters had been hospitalized after a serious fall down the main staircase. The elderly housekeeper was stable but would require weeks of recovery. How did it happen? Eleanor asked the butler, her concern evident. No one saw it, ma'am, he replied, but she had been acting strangely the day before, insisting that she needed to speak with Mr. Reed urgently about some old family matter. That night, Eleanor insisted on visiting Mrs. Winters in the hospital. Maxwell, to his own surprise, accompanied her. The old woman's eyes widened when she saw them enter her room. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, her gnarled hand reaching for his. "You came." "Of course, Margaret," Maxwell said awkwardly, unused to such informality with staff. Mrs. Winters' gaze shifted to Eleanor, and a strange expression crossed her weathered face. Fear mingled with something like recognition. "Be careful," she whispered to Maxwell, her grip on his hand suddenly fierce. "She's not who you think she is." Eleanor's face remained impassive, but Maxwell felt her stiffen beside him. "You need to rest, Margaret," Eleanor said gently, adjusting the woman's blanket with practiced ease. "The medication is making you confused." But as they left the hospital room, Maxwell caught the meaningful look that passed between the two women. A silent communication he couldn't decipher, but that sent a chill through him nonetheless. The charity gala was in full swing at the Metropolitan Museum when Victoria Caldwell made her entrance. Heads turned as she glided through the grand hall in a shimmering gown the color of champagne. At 42, she remained striking, tall, blonde and possessed of the easy confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. Maxwell tensed as he spotted her across the room. Despite everything, the sight of her still triggered a complex mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, and the dull ache of a love that had died slowly, painfully. "Relax," Eleanor murmured, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "She has no power over you anymore." She looked radiant tonight in a deep blue gown that reminded Maxwell of the Pacific waters they'd recently left behind. Around her throat gleamed a necklace of sapphires and diamonds, his gift upon their return, though he couldn't quite articulate why he'd felt compelled to give it to her. "Maxwell," Victoria greeted coolly as she approached them. "Eleanor, thank you for the invitation." "Victoria," Eleanor smiled warmly as if welcoming an old friend. "I'm so glad you could attend. The Foundation's work means so much to us both, given your mother's history." Victoria's perfect composure faltered for just a moment. "Yes, well, Mother is doing quite well these days." "Wonderful to hear," Eleanor replied. "She's in our thoughts. Now I believe the museum director was hoping to speak with you about the new contemporary wing. She's just over there with the Prestons." It was a masterful dismissal, so gracefully executed that Victoria had no choice but to nod and move away. Maxwell couldn't help but admire Eleanor's handling of the situation. No scene, no tension, just quiet authority that left Victoria looking somehow diminished. "Well played," he murmured, as they moved toward the champagne fountain. Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. "The evening is young." The gala proceeded without incident until the dinner hour. Maxwell was deep in conversation with the mayor when a commotion near the East Gallery drew everyone's attention. Victoria stood swaying slightly, her champagne glass dangerously tilted as she addressed the crowd. "Such a lovely party," she announced, her words slightly slurred. "And such a lovely couple our hosts make, so perfect, so devoted." Her gaze fixed on Eleanor. "Tell me, Eleanor dear, does he know who you really are yet? Or are you still playing the devoted wife?" The room fell silent. Maxwell moved to intervene, but Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Victoria," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed room, "I think we should get you some fresh air." "Don't touch me," Victoria hissed as Eleanor approached. "I know what you're doing. I've seen your kind before." "My kind?" Eleanor's voice remained calm. "You think you're the first of your family to try this?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "My grandmother warned me about the women who come from the sea, the ones who enchant men for their fortunes." A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Victoria was clearly drunk, her accusations absurd. Yet Maxwell felt a chill run down his spine as he recalled Eleanor's strange affinity for the ocean, the mysterious symbol in her journal. "That's enough," he said firmly, taking Victoria's elbow. "You're making a scene. Ask her about the attic." "Room," Victoria whispered as he guided her away from the crowd. "Ask her about the altar. Eleanor handled the aftermath with remarkable poise, attributing Victoria's behavior to too much champagne and the emotional stress of seeing her ex-husband. Happily remarried, by the time they returned home, the incident had been transformed into an unfortunate but ultimately forgettable social faux pas. "She's still in love with you," Eleanor observed as she removed her jewelry in their bedroom. Maxwell scoffed. "Victoria loves no one but herself." "You were married for 15 years, Eleanor countered. "There must have been love once." He watched her in the mirror as she unpinned her hair, letting it fall in waves down her back. "What Victoria felt for me was possession, not love." Eleanor turned to face him. "And what do you feel for me, Maxwell?" The question caught him off guard. According to their arrangement, feelings weren't supposed to enter the equation. Yet somehow they had complex, confusing emotions he wasn't ready to name. "I don't know," he answered honestly. She nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she already knew. "Victoria will be a problem. She's unstable." "She's always been high-strung, but tonight was different," Maxwell agreed. "What was she talking about? Women from the sea?" Eleanor's expression revealed nothing. Who knows? She was drunk and looking to cause trouble. Despite her dismissive tone, the question lingered between them. Later that night, as Eleanor slept, Maxwell found himself thinking about Victoria's other accusation, about an attic room, an altar. The mansion had several rooms in the attic, level, most used for storage. Had Eleanor claimed one for herself? The question nagged at him until 3 days later, he used a rare afternoon while Eleanor was out to investigate. The main attic spaces were, as he remembered them, dusty rooms filled with furniture and memorabilia from generations of Reeds. But at the far end of the corridor, he discovered a door he didn't recall, its brass handle newer than the others. It was locked. Maxwell stood before it, key ring in hand. As the owner of the house, he had keys to every room, or so he'd thought. This lock didn't match any key on his ring. The discovery troubled him deeply. What could Eleanor possibly need to keep locked away in his own home? He was still contemplating this when his phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Max, we've got a situation," Alan Friedman said without preamble. "Victoria's given an interview to Vanity Fair. It hits newsstands tomorrow, but my contact at the magazine gave me a heads up. She's claiming your marriage is a sham, a revenge plot against her." Maxwell swore under his breath. "Can we stop it? Not without making it a bigger story." "But that's not all. She claims to have documentation, emails between you and Eleanor discussing the arrangement." "That's impossible," Maxwell said sharply. "There are no emails. We never put anything in writing." There was a pause on the line. "Well, she's got something, and she's threatening to release it to the business press. Your international investors, especially the more conservative ones, aren't going to like this kind of scandal." After hanging up, Maxwell paced the attic corridor, his mind racing. The timing couldn't be worse. Reed Enterprises was in the final stages of securing funding for a major development in Singapore, a deal that would cement his company's international standing, but one that depended on the backing of deeply traditional investors. He was still processing this development when the door at the end of the hall opened, revealing Eleanor. She showed no surprise at finding him there. "Looking for something?" she asked quietly. "Victoria has given an interview to Vanity Fair," he said, watching her face carefully. "She's claiming our marriage is a sham, and she has emails to prove it." Something flashed in Eleanor's eyes, not alarm, but calculation. "I see. Did you write emails about our arrangement, Eleanor?" "Of course not." She stepped closer. "Victoria is desperate. She's making things up." "Then why do you have a locked room in my house?" He gestured to the door behind her. Eleanor's expression softened. "Everyone needs a private space, Maxwell. Even you have your locked desk drawer, where you keep your father's watch and the letters from your mother." It was true, though he'd never told her about those items. "What's behind that door, Eleanor?" For a long moment she studied him, as if weighing a decision. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a small brass key. "See for yourself." The room beyond was small but well appointed. a reading nook with bookshelves, a comfortable chair, and a small writing desk. On one wall hung a collection of seashells arranged in a pattern that seemed almost like script. The desk held the leather journal he'd seen before, a few books on marine history, and a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. "This is your big secret?" Maxwell asked, torn between relief and lingering suspicion. "A reading room." "We all need sanctuary," Eleanor replied. "Growing up, I never had a space that was truly mine. When I came to work for you, living in that tiny apartment in Queens, I dreamed of a room like this." The explanation was reasonable, touching even, yet Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't seeing everything. "What's in the box?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated before opening it. Inside lay a strand of pearls so lustrous they seemed to glow with an inner light, a small vial of what appeared to be sand, and a faded photograph of a woman standing on a rocky shore. The woman's face was partially turned away from the camera, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her profile. "My mother," Eleanor said softly, touching the photograph with gentle fingers. "This is all I have left of her." Maxwell studied the image. "You told me you were raised in foster care." "I was," she confirmed. "After she disappeared, I was only 5. Her eyes took on a distant quality. The authorities said she drowned, but they never found her body." "I'm sorry," Maxwell said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "And the pearls?" "A family heirloom. They're quite valuable, actually. I keep them here because I was afraid to have them in my apartment in Queens." She closed the box carefully. "Does this satisfy your curiosity, or would you like to search?" "Under the floorboards as well?" The gentle mockery in her tone made him feel suddenly foolish. Had he really expected to find an altar, as Victoria had ranted about in her drunken state? "Victoria's giving an interview," he said, returning to the more pressing issue. "We need to address it." Eleanor nodded, her manner shifting from personal to professional. "Leave it to me," she said with quiet confidence. The next morning, while Maxwell was meeting with his legal team to discuss damage control strategies, Eleanor organized a press conference. By the time he returned to the office, she had assembled a team of PR specialists and prepared a statement. "What are you doing?" he demanded when he found her in his office with 3 people he didn't recognize. "Solving our problem," she replied calmly. "This is Sarah from The Post, Michael from Bloomberg, and Rebecca from Reuters. I've invited them for an exclusive." For the next hour, Eleanor masterfully presented the image of a woman who had worked alongside Maxwell for years, gradually falling in love, but keeping her feelings hidden out of professional responsibility. She described how their relationship had evolved slowly after his divorce, with Maxwell initially resistant to office romance, but eventually unable to deny their connection. The timeline may seem quick to outsiders, as she acknowledged with a rueful smile, but when you've known someone for 15 years, there's no need for a lengthy courtship. Her performance was flawless, emotional without being sentimental, candid without revealing anything truly private. She fielded questions with grace, deflecting the more intrusive ones and responding to others with anecdotes that painted their relationship as a natural evolution. By the time the reporters left, Maxwell was stunned. The narrative Eleanor had crafted was compelling, coherent, and impossible to disprove. It made Victoria sound like a jealous ex-wife, unable to accept that her former husband had moved on. "That was," he began, struggling to find the right words. "Necessary," Eleanor finished for him. "Victoria's interview will be out tomorrow. This gets ahead of it. Your investors will see that we've addressed the accusations directly rather than hiding. It projects confidence." She was right. When Victoria's interview appeared the next day, it read like the bitter ramblings of a woman scorned. The evidence she'd promised amounted to nothing more than a few ambiguous emails that could be interpreted multiple ways, nothing concrete or damaging. Rather than harming Reed Enterprises, the entire episode seemed to strengthen their position. The company's stock rose 3 points as the market responded positively to the show of unified leadership. That night, as they prepared for bed, Maxwell found himself watching Eleanor with new eyes. She had protected not just herself but him and his company with remarkable skill. Whatever her secrets, whatever her past, she had proven herself an ally more valuable than he could have imagined when he proposed their arrangement. Eleanor caught him staring. "What?" she asked, pausing as she brushed her hair at the vanity. "Thank you," he said simply. "For today." She held his gaze in the mirror. "We're partners, Maxwell. That's what the contract says, isn't it?" But they both knew their relationship had evolved far beyond the terms of any contract. Something unspoken hung in the air between them, something that felt dangerously like genuine feeling. As if sensing his thoughts, Eleanor set down her brush and turned to face him. "Does it bother you, not having control of the situation anymore?" "What do you mean?" "This began as your game, your revenge." Her voice was soft but direct. "But the pieces are moving in ways you didn't anticipate, aren't they?" Before he could answer, a crack of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. The sudden storm that had been threatening all evening had arrived with unexpected ferocity. Eleanor moved to the balcony doors, throwing them open despite the rain that blew in. The wind whipped her nightgown around her legs as she stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette stark against the stormy sky. "There's a legend in this area," she said without turning around, "about women who come from the sea to marry powerful men. Victoria mentioned it at the gala." Maxwell joined her at the door, the rain spattering his face. "It's just a local folk tale." "All legends have a grain of truth, Maxwell." She turned to him then, her eyes reflecting the lightning. "Sometimes the sea gives back what was once taken from it." 10 months into their marriage, Maxwell and Eleanor stood on the expansive lawn of their newly acquired Montauk estate. The Newman property, a historic mansion perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, had finally come into Maxwell's possession after years of waiting. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds as workers set up for tomorrow's party. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, surveying the transformation of the once neglected estate. Under her direction, the renovation had been completed in record time, restoring the property to its former grandeur while adding modern amenities. Maxwell nodded in agreement. The acquisition had been a personal triumph. The Newman family had refused to sell to him for years, despite his increasingly generous offers. Yet when Eleanor had approached them, they'd acquiesced with surprising ease. "How did you convince them?" he'd asked when the contracts were signed. "I simply reminded them of an old family obligation," Eleanor had replied with that enigmatic smile he'd come to both treasure and fear. Now, as they walked the perimeter of the property, Maxwell found himself reflecting on the extraordinary changes of the past 10 months. What had begun as a calculated business arrangement had evolved into something far more complex. Eleanor had become not just his wife in name, but his partner in truth, her insights transforming his business, her presence transforming his life. Yet the mystery surrounding her had only deepened. The private investigator, James Donovan, had never resurfaced after his initial report. When Maxwell hired a second investigator to look into both Eleanor's background and Donovan's disappearance, the man returned empty-handed, appearing shaken and refusing to take on further work for Reed Enterprises. Mrs. Winters, after recovering from her fall, had requested early retirement and moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Before leaving, she had pressed a small book into Maxwell's hands, a collection of local folklore focusing on the coastal legends of Long Island. Several pages were marked, all featuring variations of the same story. Mysterious women emerging from the sea to marry wealthy landowners, bringing prosperity but exacting an unspecified price. "Ridiculous superstition," Maxwell had muttered, though he'd kept the book locked in his desk drawer. "The caterers need final approval on tomorrow's menu," Eleanor said, drawing him back to the present. She handed him her tablet, which displayed an elaborate seafood-focused menu. "No lobster?" he asked, noting its absence. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. "I don't care for it." "Since when? You ordered it at Le Bernardin just last month." "Maxwell," she said with unusual sharpness, "must you question everything?" Before he could respond, his phone vibrated with an incoming call. It was Victoria, the first direct contact since the disastrous gala. "I need to take this," he said, moving away from Eleanor. Victoria's voice was strained, lacking its usual imperious tone. "Max, listen to me. I know how this sounds, but you're in danger." "Victoria." "Just listen." The desperation in her voice gave him pause. "I've found something. Documents from when your great-grandfather built the original Reed mansion. There's a reason he chose that specific location." Maxwell pinched the bridge of his nose. "If this is another attempt to—" "It's not about me, damn it. Check the attic room again. Look behind the shells on the wall, and whatever you do, don't let her know you've seen it." The line went dead. Maxwell stared at his phone, torn between dismissing Victoria's warning as another desperate ploy and the nagging feeling that there might be something to her claims. "Problem?" Eleanor asked when he rejoined her. "Just business," he lied, forcing a smile. "Nothing that can't wait until after tomorrow's party." As twilight deepened, they made their way back to the main house where dozens of workers were putting final touches on the decorations. Tomorrow's event would introduce the cream of New York society to their new summer residence and celebrate Eleanor's announcement that she was expecting their first child. The pregnancy had come as a complete surprise to Maxwell. He'd made it clear when proposing their arrangement that children were not part of the plan. Yet when Eleanor had shared the news 2 weeks ago, he'd found himself speechless, not with anger, but with an unexpected surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. "I thought we had an agreement," he'd finally managed to say. "Life makes its own agreements, Maxwell," she'd replied, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Now watching her move gracefully among the workers, offering guidance and adjustments to the preparations, Maxwell was struck by a sense of inevitability, as if all of this had been predetermined long before he'd conceived his petty plan for revenge against Victoria. That night, while Eleanor slept, Maxwell slipped away to the small attic room. Using the key he'd had quietly duplicated weeks ago, he entered the space that still felt more like Eleanor's domain than any part of what was ostensibly his house. The shells on the wall were arranged in what he'd initially taken to be a decorative pattern. Now, looking more closely, he could see they formed a kind of script, symbols that seemed familiar, yet indecipherable. Remembering Victoria's instructions, he carefully felt behind the display until his fingers encountered a small lever. When he pressed it, a hidden compartment in the wall swung open. Inside was a waterproof case containing a leather-bound book far, older than the journal he'd seen before. Its pages were made of some unknown material, not quite paper, not quite parchment, that felt cool to the touch despite the warmth of the room. The text was written in the same symbol language as the shells, but interspersed with English annotations. Maxwell's blood ran cold as he scanned the pages. The book detailed a pact made between his great-grandfather, Thaddeus Reed, and what it described as the Sea Folk, a bargain exchanging prosperity for the Reed family in return for what was cryptically referred to as a vessel for return in each third generation. Accompanying the text were drawings depicting women who appeared human, except for subtle differences, an unusual pattern in the eyes, a faint scaling at the neck and wrists. Each was shown marrying into wealthy families, bearing children who carried both human and non-human traits. The final pages contained a family tree, Maxwell's family tree, with certain names circled, including his own. Beside his name was Eleanor's, and beneath them both was a symbol he couldn't decipher, but that filled him with inexplicable dread. "It's rude to read someone else's diary." Maxwell spun around to find Eleanor standing in the doorway, her white nightgown giving her an ethereal quality in the dim light. She showed no surprise at finding him there, nor at the book in his hands. "What is this?" he demanded, holding up the ancient text. "What are you?" Eleanor sighed, closing the door behind her. "I wondered when you'd find it. Victoria was moving too quickly. I should have been more careful with her." "Answer me." Maxwell felt panic rising in his throat. "What is this book talking about? What bargain did my great-grandfather make?" Eleanor moved to the small window that overlooked the ocean. Thaddeus Reed was a man of vision but limited means. He wanted to build an empire but lacked the resources. She turned back to face Maxwell. "My people offered him a trade. prosperity and success in exchange for allowing one of us to return through his bloodline. Return? Maxwell's voice was barely audible. We weren't always of the sea, Eleanor explained, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality unlike her usual speech. Once we walked the land freely, but circumstances forced us to adapt, to find refuge in the depths. The pact allows us to reclaim our place among humans. This is insane, Maxwell whispered, though the conviction in her voice made it impossible to dismiss her words entirely. Is it? Eleanor challenged. Haven't you wondered how your family rose so quickly from modest merchants to one of America's wealthiest dynasties? How every business decision Thaddeus made turned to gold? How the Reed name became synonymous with success despite setbacks that would have ruined others? She was right. The Reed fortune had always seemed charmed, surviving depressions and recessions that destroyed their competitors. Even Maxwell's riskiest ventures had inevitably succeeded, often due to unexpected turns of events that worked in his favor. The pact requires renewal every third generation, Eleanor continued. I was chosen to fulfill this cycle. Her hand came to rest on her abdomen, where their child, or what he had believed to be their child, was growing. The baby, Maxwell said, realization dawning. It's not mine. Eleanor's laugh was gentle but devoid of warmth. Oh, it's yours, Maxwell. Your contribution was essential. But the child will be more than human, a perfect union of land and sea, the vessel through which more of my kind can return. Maxwell backed away, his mind reeling. This can't be real. Can't it? Eleanor moved toward him with fluid grace. Haven't you felt it? The pull of the tides in your blood, the way storms follow us, the inexplicable luck that surrounds your business dealings since our marriage? She reached out to touch his face. So you were chosen, Maxwell. Your family has prospered for generations because of our pact. The truth of her words resonated within him, connecting disparate memories. His lifelong fascination with the ocean, despite his fear of deep water. The strange dreams he'd experienced since childhood, of breathing underwater. The unexplainable sense of recognition he'd felt the first time Eleanor had walked into his office 15 years ago. What happens now? He asked, his voice steadier than he would have expected. Tomorrow we celebrate, Eleanor said simply. We introduce our circle to the newest Reed property. We announce the coming child. We continue building the empire your great-grandfather began. She took the book from his unresisting hands and returned it to its hiding place. Nothing has changed, Maxwell. I'm still your wife. We're still partners. Partners, he repeated hollowly. In what, exactly? Eleanor's smile was radiant and terrible in its beauty. In the future, your business acumen and my connections make us unstoppable. The child will cement our legacy and fulfill the promise made generations ago. Maxwell looked into her eyes he now realized had always contained the shifting depths of the sea, and understood with perfect clarity that he had never been the one in control. What he had begun as a petty scheme for revenge had been part of a design set in motion long before his birth. Did you ever love me? He asked, the question surprising them both. Eleanor's expression softened. Love is a human concept, but... She paused, seeming to search for the right words. I chose you, Maxwell. From all the Reed descendants, I selected you. I've shared your home, your bed, your life for months, by choice, not just obligation. Is that not a kind of love? Outside, the tide rose against the cliffs below the mansion, reaching higher than it had in decades. In the distance, lightning flashed across a clear sky, and a wind arose that carried the scent of salt and ancient secrets. Maxwell thought of Victoria's warnings, of Mrs. Winters's fear, of the investigators who had vanished or fled. He thought of the family legacy built on a bargain with beings from the deep. He thought of the child that would be born of their union, a child neither fully human nor fully other. And then he thought of Eleanor, the woman who had entered his life as a quiet assistant and transformed into something extraordinary. Whatever her true nature, whatever her purpose, he could not deny the connection that had formed between them. It transcended the arrangement they had made, the revenge he had sought, the secrets she had kept. In that moment, standing in the small attic room with the evidence of generations of supernatural pacts surrounding them, Maxwell Reed made his choice. "The party starts at noon," he said, taking Eleanor's hand. "We should get some rest." Her smile told him she understood exactly what his decision meant: acceptance, complicity, surrender. As they descended the stairs together, the ancient book safely hidden once more, Maxwell felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead was uncharted, the future uncertain. But one thing was clear: the game he had thought he was playing had always been beyond his understanding. Tomorrow, they would stand together before Manhattan's elite and announce the coming child. The Reed dynasty would continue, prosperity would flow, and the bargain made by his great-grandfather would be fulfilled. And somewhere beneath the waves, ancient beings would stir in anticipation of their return.